The Asset Register tab contains all of the settings that are pertinent to the tracking and the calculation of depreciation for your fixed assets. It's really important to check these settings carefully. It can affect the way that depreciation is calculated, how journal entries are created. It can also affect how we identify new asset purchases, and it can also affect any automation that you want to have in place. This is going to include the depreciation method, creating asset groups and mapping them to your chart of accounts, your automation settings, and your depreciation rules. To make any changes to the settings in place, we need to click on the pencil icon on the far right. Let's start with the depreciation method. Here we can choose if the depreciation method is calculated on a month-by-month basis, whether it is calculated in year. The depreciation journals will always be posted on a monthly basis, but the in-year option means that a full year's worth of depreciation will be applied to an asset regardless of the month in which it is purchased. We'll select by month. You can also choose whether depreciation is calculated on a month-by-month basis, reporting period, or if it is calculated on the number of days. That means if it is purchased part way through a month, it will be based on a daily calculation. I'm going to select reporting period, so a full month within the month of purchase. When depreciation journals are posted, the default is to set the journals to be condensed. That will create a summary of all of the balances required to be adjusted between the balance sheet and the profit and loss. You can remove the tick so that a fully detailed journal is created. However, if you do have a lot of assets, that could create a journal with hundreds or thousands of lines, and it could actually slow down the performance of your accounting software. When fixed assets are disposed, nettTraker will create automatically all of the required journal entries. When the cost value is removed from the balance sheet, if you use the same account that you used when the asset was purchased, then you simply want to put a tick into that box, and nettTraker will automatically use that account during the mapping process. If you do use separate balance sheet accounts to monitor movements such as additions in year, depreciation in year, and disposals during the year, you can select this tick box to ensure those movements are adjusted to your total accumulated balances. In this example, that option is not required, so we simply choose to save those settings. Next, we need to create our asset groups and map them to the chart of accounts in our accounting software. And we do that by first selecting the option to create a new group. The first thing we need to do is give our asset group a name. Then we can select what is going to be the default depreciation rule used with this asset group. And this can be overridden when assets are created. If you don't see the depreciation rule you require, you can create your own depreciation rules in the depreciation rules area. Previously, we've selected that when assets are disposed, we're going to use the same balance sheet accounts used when assets are acquired. So that tick box is already in place, but you can remove it. You can add further notes, but it's not mandatory. Within general account mappings, we select which balance sheet account should be used to track new asset purchases. You can select from the drop down. You can also search for that account. You do exactly the same for your balance sheet account for depreciation by selecting from the drop down or searching. And again the same for the profit and loss account used for the depreciation expense. If you don't see all of the expected chart of account categories, you can refresh the list using the option on the right. Next, in the disposal account mappings area, we can see that the balance sheet options are greyed out because we've selected to use the same accounts already used for our asset purchases because of the tick box that is in place. I simply need to map the profit and loss account used for our gains and losses, which in this example is going to be proceeds from the sale of assets. With my mappings complete, I'll select the option to save. Let's create another quickly for motor vehicles, so selecting create new group, so naming the asset group, selecting the required depreciation rule, choosing to map to the account for our asset additions, mapping the balance sheet account for depreciation, mapping the profit and loss account for the depreciation expense, and then selecting the profit and loss account for the gains and losses on disposal of assets. All mappings in place, we can save. We can now see within the asset groups and account mappings area for the different asset groups that we have created, so computer equipment as an example, we can see the mappings in place for our additions, depreciation and depreciation expense against our balance sheet accounts and our profit and loss, and for our disposal mappings, the cost adjustment, the adjustment for depreciation and the disposal expense to the same balance sheet accounts but a different account for our proceeds of sale of assets. And we can also see from the summary page the default depreciation rule. If you need to make any edits to those asset groups, we can simply go to the pencil icon on the far right where we can edit the asset group and make any required changes. Scrolling down a little, we'll move on next to the automation settings. Again, to make any changes, we need to click on the pencil icon on the far right. First of all, we can choose to refresh transactions. Once a fortnight, a routine takes place that means that nettTraker will contact your accounting software provider to look for any new transactions. If it's found any new transactions, new asset purchases, we can create assets from those. And we can choose to automatically add those asset purchases to the asset register. You can put a threshold in place, so only to add new assets if, for example, the value of an asset exceeded £500, $500. When a new asset is created, you can allow nettTraker to create asset references for you using the option to use generated asset references. You can allow nettTraker to put a prefix in and what the first number should be. With your settings in place, simply choose to save. In the final section, we have our depreciation rules. 16 commonly used depreciation rules are already in place, but you can create further depreciation rules as and when you need to. Simply click on the plus icon towards the top right hand corner of this area. The first thing we need to do is give our depreciation rule a name and then select what type of depreciation is this. Is it to be set over a number of years, over a number of months, reducing balance, which is your declining balance, or double decline? Here I'm going to select, this is going to be over 27 months. From the drop down, I'll select the number of months that I wish. And now I can choose to save. The new depreciation rule will appear in my list, and if I need to edit the rule, I can click on the pencil icon, and if I choose to delete it, I can click on the trash icon. That brings us to the end of our asset register settings, where we've reviewed the depreciation method, created asset groups and mapped them to our chart of accounts, reviewed the automation settings, and also reviewed our depreciation rules and created further rules if required.